we doing it?
Props. Hello, good afternoon. Full props to Adrian, who's not only a curator, historian, but also a tech guy.
Who knew?
Good afternoon and welcome to the Irving Archives Museum. I'm so excited to see y'all here, some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Jennifer Landry, museum director, and my pronouns are she, her. Please join me as we acknowledge the ancestral land that we stand on. We respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional ancestral lands of the Kickapoo, Tawakoni, and Wichita nations. The process of knowing and acknowledging the land we stand on is a way of honoring and expressing gratitude for those who have come before us and who are with us still. Thank you. Now, it is my honor to introduce the Executive Director of Badge and Pride, Adrian Cardwell.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining us here today on a blistery Sunday afternoon, and to those who are tuning in live, good to see you here as well. But thank you all for coming. Has everybody been to the exhibit yet? Has anybody not been to the exhibit? Yeah, okay, good. Well, the good news is the exhibit is open after we do the program here today, but I'm so excited to welcome you all here. This has been a 3-year journey getting to this spot. So when Jennifer and I met for the first time about 3 years ago, her son was a high school senior and is now a college junior. So this has been a long process. But this is sort of the culmination of a 30-year journey of my own, starting the collection that is now the foundation of Badge of Pride, and just collecting these things through connections with activists and leaders around the globe for 30 years. And our collection is now 10,000 objects that we are now working to activate and do programming. This is our first major exhibition. We're running through the end of September. And once we wrap up here, we'll be reformatting what you see here. We'll be reformatting it so it can travel. We want this to go to places around Texas. We want it to go around the South. This is where we need to take this history, right? And so I'm so thankful to Jen and the Irving Archives Museum team, who have been fabulous through this whole journey. And so we learned a lot because yeah, I was not I'm not a museum person, but I guess I'm I am now. My friend Melissa, who's also on the board, she teases me. She's like, "Okay, Cardwell, you're going to come out of the closet twice. One as a gay man, and two as a museum person." And here we are. And so, what a delight it has been. And I'm thankful to Nino because Nino also served on our exhibit advisory committee. So when we were pulling this together, we pulled a group of people together to say, does what we're doing here make sense? Are we telling the right stories? Are we, choosing the right objects? Or are we aligned and representative of the community? And Nino was a great voice in that process early on, and helped kind of shape what you see in the room there. So, but without further ado, it is my delight to welcome Nino to tell a very important story that you can see firsthand here in the space. So Nino, take it away.
All right, thank you all so much. Thank you for being here. And I have a few thank yous of my own, so you'll bear with me as I get through them. But after the Adrian and Badge of Pride, it's been such an incredible experience. And just thank you for the work that you put into this incredible exhibit. It's meant so much to the community here, and there's been, I don't know how much of you'll follow, but some challenges and some opposition, and that means I guess you're doing something right, and I think underscores how important the work has been. And I want to thank, of course, Irving Archives Museum, especially Jennifer, and all the administrative janitorial staff who've kind of created this space for us to come and see this incredible exhibit and to learn today about Duane's art and activism. I want to thank Morgan Geringer and the staff of Special Collections at UNT, who helped me to preserve my research on Duane. They've just continued to be great partners. The Dallas Way for their continued support, especially Robert Emery and Mike Anglin, who've been great supporters of my work over the years. And I'll add Carl Parker to that. Thank you for being here, Carl. But yeah, my work with the Dallas Way really was the catalyst for my starting this project. And finally, my interviewees, I have to thank. I interviewed for this project Martha Puryear, Doug Puryear, those are Duane's parents, Dan Rich, Terry Carmody, William Wayburn, Rodney Holcomb, and Gert McMullen, and they were all incredible. And getting to know us, getting especially to know Martha and Doug has been so wonderful. I just saw them in Santa Fe a couple of weeks ago. I went to visit them, and that's been such an incredible experience to get to know them. And they're watching. They should be watching right now. I think you're watching. I hope they are. If not, we'll show this to them later. So thank you, especially to Martha and Doug. Okay. So I'll jump right in. Although the founders of what was then called the NAMES Project AIDS Memorial Quilt intended that friends and family of those who had died of AIDS-related complications would contribute panels in memory of their loved ones. In 1988, Duane Puryear famously created a panel for himself. It is arguably one of the most memorable panels of the AIDS quilt, made of white cloth with stark black letters that look like stenciling but are actually individually pieces of cut and sewed fabric. It reads, "My name is Duane Kearns Puryear. I was born on December 20, 1964. I was diagnosed with AIDS on September 7, 1987 at 4:45 p.m. I was 22 years old. Sometimes it makes me very sad. I made this panel myself. If you are reading it, I am dead." In many ways, Duane Puryear's story is like so many others represented on the 50,000 plus panels of the quilt. He struggled with his relationship with his parents and developed his voice as an activist by organizing within the gay community of Dallas and participating in various direct action demonstrations, advocating for the rights of people with AIDS, for sexual health education, and public funding for AIDS research and services. Unlike many other gay men of his generation, Duane reconciled with his parents, Martha and Doug, who eventually became his greatest supporters and custodians of his legacy. His family and friends remember Duane as brilliant, charismatic, gregarious, handsome, as you'll see, dynamic, frank, and unflinching in his commitment to destigmatize HIV/AIDS. He dedicated his short life to education, advocacy, and prevention efforts. And importantly, want to underscore that Duane was an artist, and his quilt panel became his best known and most circulated work of AIDS activist art. But the famous panel also contains a hidden history. The truth is, despite the autobiographical statement it contains, Duane Puryear did not make the panel on block 2052 of the AIDS quilt. While the origins of his panel are rooted in the AIDS activist movement of Dallas, the panel we see today has an unforgettable backstory that I'll share a little bit with you today, if you don't know it already, that demonstrates the quilt's dual function as both activist art and community memorial. And I'm not actually going to focus on the AIDS quilt today. So if you want to learn more about the AIDS quilt, today is not your day. And for a variety of reasons, because the history of the AIDS quilt is very well documented and you can read it. I really want to focus on Duane today. But I'll just start, if we don't know anything about the AIDS quilt. The AIDS quilt was founded in San Francisco by activist Cleve Jones in 1985. Its first full display was in 1987 on the National Mall. And importantly, just kind of as a visual, just to be able to interpret what you see when you go look at panels, each panel is 6 feet by 11, which is meant to mimic the size of a grave. So Cleve Jones talks about wanting to line up all of the bodies of people who had died of AIDS and what would it look like on the National Mall if you could visualize their bodies. That's not true of so some blocks actually are one giant block. So there's variations of it, but that's kind of the base of what a panel is. So when you look at one panel, that's kind of a thing we should have in mind. So here now we'll move on to talking about Duane. Okay. So this is Duane. Duane, yeah, I know. Duane Puryear. Duane Puryear was born in a snowstorm in Little Rock, as his panel tells us, on December 20th, 1964. 6 months later, his family moved to Baltimore, where Duane grew up, and then later to Dallas, where he went to high school. He eventually spent time living in St. Louis and San Francisco as well. According to Martha and Doug Puryear, Duane's gender and sexuality were policed from a very early age. In kindergarten, Martha told a story about his teacher pulling her aside and expressing great concern that he would play with girls and dolls. And Martha was very defensive of Duane. She told stories about he underwent fairly severe harassment at school from his peers. She told a story about kids putting out cigarettes on his stomach at a sleepover once. So from a very young age, he was a child who was different. He also had ADHD, which his parents didn't know until later. And so he was a challenging child for them to parent. There was a lot of experiences that Duane had from a very early age of not fitting in and not being understood. Duane believed he had contracted HIV after his first sexual experience with a handsome stranger while he was a teenager in Dallas. He later stated that his commitment to HIV, excuse me, microphone, to HIV education stemmed from his anger that he had not been given accurate sexual health information as a young person. After Duane was diagnosed with AIDS, he was, by all accounts, fully transformed. He became a person on a mission. Everyone I interviewed said this. He had a clear sense of purpose in life, and that purpose was to help young people understand HIV in the absence of clear and accessible sexual health education in their communities, especially here in Dallas. While living in St. Louis, Duane traveled back to Dallas to stay with his parents whenever he was sick, which was not infrequently. And while he was in Dallas, Duane became active in the Dallas AIDS education and activist community as a volunteer for the AIDS Resource Center. He worked on an AIDS hotline. He helped found a speakers bureau that toured the city, including schools and hospitals in the late 1980s, sharing his own personal experiences with HIV and disseminating safer sex curriculum. He won a recognition award from the ARC for his work in 1988. Duane was committed to destigmatizing people with AIDS and educating communities about HIV in the absence of organized and intentional efforts by the city. He knew that gay youth would continue to be at heightened risk because the state of Texas was withholding life-saving sexual health information from them. Incidentally, the state of Texas still does not include LGBTQ sexual health information in relation to HIV prevention in its mandatory sex education. I know this especially because in 2020, I shared Duane's story in virtual testimony. This was during COVID, before the Texas Education Agency, as it considered a proposal to do so, which it later rejected. According to Doug, Duane frequently did this work while quite sick and sometimes sporting a t-shirt. This is one of Doug's favorite stories about Duane that read, "That's Mr. Fag to you." Unthinkably provocative move in Dallas at the time or today, but typical of Duane's irreverent and apologetic attitude toward his life and work. So Duane was also really involved in the direct action group GUTS, which you'll see a GUTS button here and an artifact in the exhibit, which stood for Gay Urban Truth Squad. It was a direct action group in Dallas, sometimes also called Gay Urban Terrorist Squad, and the advocacy group Gay Dallas Alliance in these years. And there were many actions that he worked on. The one that I want to highlight is through DGA. He supported the DGA's efforts to sue the only public hospital in Dallas County, Parkland Memorial, for their discriminatory treatment of people with HIV, despite his father being employed there as a psychiatrist at the time. The DGA alleged a discriminatory practice of limiting the number of hospital beds to those who were HIV positive, practice which Parkland denied. And that lawsuit helped to catalyze broader activism around access to treatments, including AZT, which had really long wait lists, and aerosolized pentamidine therapies. And then I'm going to skip ahead here. So in all of this work, Duane's goal was to reduce stigma and discrimination confronted by HIV positive people. For example, when Duane, much of which he experienced firsthand. For example, when Duane converted to Judaism late in his life after experiencing anti-gay discrimination in his Episcopal church, members of the observant community of his synagogue in St. Louis refused to let an HIV positive person be immersed in water in their mikvah. And undeterred, Duane completed the conversion ceremony in a hot tub at his rabbi's home. And his rabbi sort of adopted him into her life and her family in a certain kind of way, and still honors him through prayer every year at Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur because of the impact he had on their synagogue. In a 1989 interview for an educational AIDS film, Spread the Word, which was narrated by Jaleel White of Steve Urkel fame, if you know him, Duane participated in this project, and he recounted a horrific story of a staff member at a hospital in Dallas that I wanted to share because it's really representative of the type of dehumanization that people experienced in medical settings.
And I worry a lot about what she's going to do when I get ill. I remember very early on, I was in hospital in Dallas, Texas, very early on in my illness, and things were just incredibly different. We could not get food brought into my room. We could not get my floor swept, and I was in the hospital for 12 weeks, 18 weeks. And we could not get my room cleaned. My mom was there with me, and I raised holy heck with the hospital administration. I have always been very vocal about what I think it's called self-advocacy, politely. So after much yelling and screaming, my mother and I together, it was a vent, I think, for a lot of our anger about me being ill, but my mother and I together won a small victory and got a woman to come in and mop my floor, finally. And the woman came in and was just grotesque, just would not look at me, would not speak to me, had full body armor on, and my mother and I tried to be very polite to her, and she said, after she finished mopping and had put the entire mop into a garbage bag and had pulled the head off with her feet, and she looked at my mom and with me lying in bed awake, told my mom that she very calmly wished that I would hurry up and die so that she wouldn't have to ever do that again. You know, I think about it a lot, and I wish I knew her name. When I've gotten sick again, I thought I won't do it. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna die so that this woman does not have to clean my floor. I'm not gonna die so that it's easier for these people to deliver their mails. You know, the fact that I went through that with my mom, you know, has brought us really close, stuff like that.
Kinds of experiences which were fairly common. I chose this as kind of a representative experience that happened in hospitals were often the site of these kinds of stories for people. Fueled Duane's commitment to AIDS education and advocacy. So now I want to talk a little bit about Duane as an artist. And I want to start as if this were a classroom. I have some of my former students here, so they know I like to get people talking. And I just want everyone here to maybe, not everyone here, but if anyone here wants to maybe share a reaction to Duane's quilt. I feel like I have my interpretation and understanding of it, but everyone here is maybe seeing something different. So what stands out to you about Duane's quilt panel that you'd maybe want to share with the group? Yeah, Mike.
What do you mean by the ellipsis at the end?
Great question. What do you think he meant, Mike? Yeah, that's a great question. Anyone want to think about that? It's something that I've definitely spent some time thinking about. Yeah, the ellipsis at the end. What comes after that? What was left out? Yeah. What do other people see, or what questions come up for people about the panel? What does it remind you of?
When I see those, I think, I guess I infer that the person wants you to think about what they just said.
Yeah, yeah.
What I infer. Sort of over to you now.
Yeah.
Think about this.
Your turn to think about this. Yeah, absolutely. That's an interpretation that I share. Yeah. What about other folks? Yeah, back here, and then we'll come up here in the orange. Yeah.
So matter of fact, but
Yeah, like he's talking right to you. Yeah, addressing you. Yeah, Katie?
I don't know much about him specifically.
Yeah.
But his story, but having this part of Trinity Pride, he had a big panel on the street, and it was definitely tied to the AIDS Quilt. So seeing how we have come so far, but we still have so far to go.
Yeah.
Definitely we're still in a lot of this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Teresa.
I think it was very long.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed, on September 7th at 4:45 p.m. I was 22 years old. It mimics the language of the birth announcement.
Yeah, that's a really good
It's like there was being born into new kind of life at that moment.
Yeah, I had not thought of it that way. Yeah, absolutely. That marking of that particular moment after an announcement of his birthday as well really emphasizes that.
Like I was 22, or he was 22 inches long. It was
Yeah, absolutely.
more than just the one.
Absolutely. Yeah, great.
But one line where he said, I made this panel myself.
Yeah.
The sense of loneliness that was there in 1987,
Yeah.
and the fact that it's still there now is just rich.
Yeah, that interpreting that line as about loneliness is really interesting. I've always thought of it as like kind of like, because he's a very proud person, I made this panel myself. But to think of it also as I made it alone is a really powerful way to think of it. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, one more. Yeah.
Personal, but his birthday's there, and he was born 8 days before my mom. And so I'm thinking,
Yeah.
like, oh wow, he would be my mom's age.
Yeah.
And that is
100%. Dates on the AIDS Quilt always do that. You'll find dates that resonate with you, and that's part of the experience. Like I once saw my birthday on my actual birthday as a death date, 84, June 14th, 84. And those moments resonate. And I think that that's part of the experience of the AIDS Quilt is to place yourself in relation to these people who you'll never meet. Yeah, absolutely. But as you'll see from every panel of the AIDS Quilt is a work of art and is its own unique thing to interpret. But Duane stands out. Duane's is really different, and a lot of the other ones have a lot in common. They have a lot of shared kind of trope visual imagery that is used in panels. A lot of the same formats and structures are used, and his stands out. Not that that means the others are not significant and important, but it stood out to me when I was writing my dissertation in grad school about AIDS activism and art, and I was doing a chapter on the quilt, and so that's really where my interest in Duane started. Was I saw this shocking kind of thing on the quilt, and you can go look at the AIDS quilt, and I encourage you to do so online. There's a search function, and you can do things like search for names or cities or other keywords. They need to get better about keywords and imagery that's on the quilt. That's something they want to do, but it's a really cool way to kind of learn more or get to see more panels that you might not get to see. So Duane's panel is a visual representation of, in addition to all of those things, and thank you for sharing those interpretations. It's also a commitment a visual representation of his commitment to the politics of direct action. And I feel that way for a few reasons. The bare bones black lettering that Duane's panel was inspired by the agitprop imagery of ACT UP and contemporary trends that used stenciled text to address viewers. As cultural theorist Andrew Weiner argues, ACT UP's text designs incorporated sans serif and all caps fonts bearing urgent messages, and that their media generally shared a distinctive tone. Excuse me, something's happening here. There we go. One able to range from principled outrage to pointed sarcasm, open eroticism, and proud affirmation. Duane's panel is a reference to the crisp and news headline and advertising-inspired posters of the ACT UP affiliated artist collective Grand Fury, which addressed both public officials and the viewer in a direct, confrontational tone to demand action and reject the dehumanization of people with AIDS. John Lindell, a former member of Grand Fury, reflected on his design of a 1988 poster titled "All People with AIDS Are Innocent," that the starkness of its black font on white background made the statement appear adamant and objective. The simplicity of the aesthetic and of the message challenged the normalization of anti-gay logics that dictated responses to the epidemic and perpetuated violence against people with HIV. And we can see in this particular image the use of the rod of Asclepius, an interest in how anti-queerness impacted, in particular, medical communities, or medical spaces, people's experiences of the medical industry. And of course, ACT UP is famous for its artwork targeting political figures and religious figures, as well as the medical field. Duane took himself seriously as an artist, and his friendship with Dan Rich, who I interviewed, helped him to contextualize, who might also be watching. Hi, Dan, if you're watching. Who had worked, Dan had worked at the St. Louis Art Museum when he knew Duane, and their relationship really helped Duane to contextualize himself as an artist and understand himself as an artist. He said of Duane that his art was his political expression and that his panel summed up his personality, quote, being in your face, being autobiographical, being sort of bold and courageous, and identifying himself, not hiding behind any kind of artifice. Rich recalled another work of Duane's, or another work that Duane had created called Infinite Numbers, that you see here, to address the immeasurable loss of AIDS. It's a pair of black shoes with white numbers covering it, which Rich had interpreted as a reference to the piles of shoes so often used to represent the mass death of the Nazi genocide. And Rich said he certainly saw the AIDS crisis as a Holocaust. And so the idea of these infinite numbers on shoes was an expression of that. Rich went on to display this piece at the St. Louis Holocaust Museum, where he worked on December 1st, 2005, the Day Without Art, organized by Visual AIDS, you might know, alongside of a pair of shoes from a concentration camp. And so it's been, it's another piece of art that has been well seen by that community, at least in St. Louis. Duane's invocation of the Holocaust draws on the provocative imagery of Grand Fury, half of whom were Jewish, who believed the inverted pink triangle that so-called homosexuals wore in Nazi death camps would be an apt symbol for the annihilation of gay men. And you see that pink triangle all over the exhibit. As you go through it today, you can be thinking about it, and I'll talk a little bit more about it soon. The black and white motif, the pink triangle here, you'll see also, and the direct address of the viewer characteristic of Duane's panel also recalls David Wojnarowicz's iconic 1988 leather jacket, which instructs readers to disavow the decorum of death rituals in favor of provocative direct action. As you can read here, if I die of AIDS, forget burial, just drop my body on the steps of the FDA. Wojnarowicz wore this jacket at the same action at which Duane completed his quilt panel in 1988, which I'll talk a little bit about. So there was a display of the quilt happening at the Ellipse in DC, and then ACT UP activists organized a takeover of the Food and Drug Administration in Bethesda, about 30 minutes away, and there was an exchange of people who kind of went to both. And that was a kind of iconic action called Seize Control of the FDA. I don't know if Duane went to that portion. I'm gonna guess he did, just knowing what I've heard about him. There were Dallas activists, including John Thomas, who reported to the Dallas Voice that he got on top of a bus in front of the FDA with quilt blocks and stopped traffic for a long time. And I think people got arrested. So if there were Dallas people doing that, I'm sure Duane was doing it too, but I don't have any evidence of that. Duane's panel resembles but predates another famous Wojnarowicz design from 1990, 1991, untitled, also called One Day This Kid, which similarly uses black text on a white background to underscore the normalization and acceptance of anti-gay ideologies. So Wojnarowicz here narrates the social exclusion and anti-gay violence that a boy will face when he, quote, discovers he desires to put his naked body on the naked body of another boy, just as Duane's panel offers itself as an artifact of his inevitable death. Both works implicitly challenge viewers to disrupt the violence and death that these imagined young people will experience as a result of these anti-queer ideologies. And you can also see here, these are other works by Duane. These are hanging in Martha and Doug's living room right now. But Duane used this black and white kind of textual aesthetic in a lot of his other art, which his family and friends now own. Here's another piece that I really love. And then this was this is Duane at the in DC at the quilt display, which I'll talk more about soon. But he made this sweatshirt himself, Student with AIDS, which I thought for the longest time was an organization, and I was like trying to do research, like where's this SWA? I don't see anything about it. I was like, I think that was just Duane saying I'm a student with AIDS. We're still a lot of time on that. Okay, where am I going? 10. Okay. Like Wojnarowicz's leather jacket, Duane's quilt panel reads as a message from beyond the grave, a startling disruption of the expected viewing experience of the quilt. Just as jarring as the dead naming himself in his own memorial is the way he addresses an imagined audience in an indeterminate future. If you are reading it, so as some folks suggested here, really kind of invokes the reader. By addressing the viewer, the panel challenges the quilt encounter as one of memorialization only, implicating the reader as it interpolates them. A popular tactic of AIDS activist art. For instance, as Weiner argues, the iconic silence equals death design, which you will see in the exhibit as well, which became synonymous with ACT UP protests, asks its viewers to, quote, determine their own solidarities, antagonisms, and responsibilities. Similarly, artist and Grand Fury member Avram Finkelstein insists that ACT UP's agitprop is wholly rooted in the motivating, quote, wholly rooted in the motivating principle behind the activation of social spaces, dialogue. It was an act of call and response, a request for participation because lives were and still are at stake. And we can see here also that's the guts of the Dallas activists inverted. So this is in the concentration camps, the triangle pointed down. ACT UP activists inverted the triangle as a symbol of power, but Dallas activists kept it in its original form. Maybe some folks here want to talk about that. So you can see the parallels in that imagery. So like the call and response of ACT UP's most famous imagery, Duane's panel creates a space for the viewer to imagine the possibility of their own actions in contrast to the finality of Duane's death. Right, so it articulates what is true of all panels when you look at them, that the person who this is about has died, and here you are looking at this panel, and you're alive. Our reading is conditioned on his death, like the reading of a last will and testament. If you are reading it, then I am dead, it implies. Our active reading marks Duane's death, a death that may be behind us now, but that was in front of Duane as he constructed the panel, and maybe could have been prevented so that we might not have been reading this panel. The if-then construction demonstrates the activist impulse of the panel and the quilt itself as it marks the failures, political, medical, and cultural, that allowed the death to happen. It draws attention to that passage of time between when he made the panel and when he died. So it doesn't actually tell us when he died. He couldn't have told us when he died, right, in the panel. But what could we or the culture have done differently in that period that might have made things otherwise? So I wanted to point out these overlaps in particular to these other pieces of AIDS activist art because for a few reasons. One, I think that Duane's a really important artist of his era who people don't really know a lot about because he died really young, which is not an uncommon story. Also because our histories of HIV AIDS activism and art are very New York centric. And I want people to be thinking about how the aesthetics, Duane was embedded in an aesthetic movement that was national, a political movement that was national that had local iterations. And there was a dialogue between different places. It didn't all just like start in New York and then people just copied it. Like things were going in all sorts of different directions. People met each other at these actions. And so I think contextualizing Dallas art and activism is an important part of that history. I also think, and I make this argument more broadly in my article that I won't dwell on it here, but there's a lot of ways that we historicize the AIDS quilt as in tension with ACT UP and with direct activism. Like it's like, oh, there's the quilt and there was ACT UP, but in fact there were a lot of overlaps between them aesthetically and politically, and so I wanted to highlight that. But I have to also pause here to say, after this year, I can no longer look at Duane's panel in quite the same way without putting it in conversation with the words of Palestinian journalist Hossam Shabbat. If you did not hear his about Hossam, this is him here, who living through another Holocaust in our lifetime and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, similarly wrote his own epitaph of sort, which was released after he was targeted by Israeli forces in March of this year. Shabbat wrote, "If you are reading this, I have been killed, most likely targeted by the Israeli occupation forces. For the past 18 months, I have dedicated every moment of my life to my people. I documented the horrors in northern Gaza minute by minute, determined to show the world the truth they tried to bury. I slept on pavement, in schools, in tents, anywhere I could. Each day was a battle for survival. I endured hunger for months, yet I never left my people's side." And I'm extremely moved by this statement and its parallels to Duane's artwork, not just in form, but in the determination to testify to the dignity and humanity of Palestinians during this genocide, just as Duane insisted upon the dignity and humanity of people with AIDS at a time when they were being so thoroughly dehumanized, and that he had the foresight to do this in a sense from beyond the grave. You can see here, ACT UP New York repurposed their own imagery with a watermelon in solidarity with Gaza, which I think also underscores these parallels. The Duane similarly saw his people, as all people with AIDS, as his people, I think is a really important point, to use Hossam Shabbat's words. By preemptively marking their own deaths, Hossam and Duane are expressing not just concern for their own lives, but for the lives of their people in hopes that the dying can stop. I want to talk a little bit about the construction of Duane's panel. In May of '88, Duane volunteered, as you see here, at the Dallas stop of the first national tour of the AIDS Quilt. Martha said that that Duane wanted to be the first person to make his own panel for the AIDS Quilt, and Doug laughed at this and said Duane had to do everything differently, which was a refrain in his interview. So this is him here. I have this theory, I don't know, whatever, I'm making it up. But there's a picture of him next to this panel for someone named Duane Willis. There's no indication that he knew this person, Duane Willis. No one who knew Duane knew who Duane Willis was. And I just imagined him seeing this panel and like thinking about his own death, like much like we see a panel and think, oh, that's my birthday, or my mom was born that year. To see his name on a panel maybe got him thinking about his own death in a different way. And so he later that year, he went to DC in 1988 to be a part of the second national display of the quilt, where he was proud to have marched with the Dallas contingent, and he read names. You can see him here. He was listed as from St. Louis, student with AIDS. He did work on his panel in St. Louis. This is him then again with that same panel on the ellipse in DC. So again, kind of returning to that panel really makes me think about it as kind of inspiration for his panel. According to my interview, no one knew that, Duane's parents didn't even know this, but that according to my interview with Names Project staff member Gert McMullen, who is known as the keeper of the quilt. She's a legendary kind of figure in quilt history. Duane actually completed his quilt panel on the ellipse near the massive display that weekend. I don't know how he did that, but she saw him with her own eyes sewing this thing, and went up to him and told the story about, like, I was like, what are you doing? She's like, stop doing that. She told him not to do it. She was like, you're not supposed to do that. People are supposed to make the panel for you. Which is kind of amazing. And she was like, yeah, he was going to do it anyway, so good for him. Gert McMullen also, I know I'm taking tangents here, but incredible. When I interviewed her, it was like March of 2020, and she had just moved back to San Francisco with the quilt, and she's had her hand on every block of the AIDS quilt, and she was making masks out of scraps of the AIDS quilt because there was a mask shortage, and she was just like, what do I have? And it was incredible. So wish I could keep talking about her, but we got to keep moving. So after this demonstration, Duane took the panel back with him to Dallas. You can see him. Okay, sorry, here's him marching. Maybe later some Dallas people can look at this and see if you know anybody. There's the Dallas crew. And this is a very famous photo of Duane with his completed panel in DC at the ellipse. After the action, he took this panel back with him to Dallas, but he accidentally left it on his flight back to his Southwest Airline flight back to Love Field. Frantically, Duane and his family attempted to recover the panel, but the airline was never able to locate it and was probably thrown away. And Duane was obviously very distraught and disappointed. He'd been especially proud of his quilt panel and believed that it would be an important piece of AIDS activist art, but he was also very sick. And with his frequent travels between St. Louis and his family's home in Dallas, he was never able to remake it. He died in a hospital in St. Louis on October 8th, 1991, which was exactly 3 years after he completed the panel, October 8th, 1988, in DC. His parents, siblings, and friends, including Dan Rich, were by his side. His parents were obviously devastated, even though they understood his death to be inevitable. They became part of an AIDS grief support group at White Rock Community Church, run by another legend of HIV/AIDS community who I wish I could talk more about, Marilyn Hollingsworth, who had a little video clip of, which I won't be able to show just for time. She had lost her own son, Rick, to AIDS-related complications in 1987. And her son is actually, if you go look at the block that Duane's panel is on, her son is memorialized on that block as well, in a large multi-panel block with a lot of Dallas names on it. Rick Hollingsworth, if you want to look for it. Hollingsworth would eventually run the Names Project chapter in North Texas and use the quilt to help many families and friends grieve their losses, in addition to raising funds for AIDS service organizations. According to Martha, Marilyn just showed up at their house one day in East Dallas with a big bag full of these pre-cut letters and said, y'all should really remake this panel. And they were like, no, we can't do that. It's too much. And eventually they decided to do it. They laid out all of the panel and the letters on their dining room table, and it took about 3 months or so. And they just sewed a little bit of time. It was Martha, Doug, Martha's mother, Gladys Kearns, and Duane's young niece, Katie, who was a toddler, at the time, and actually she currently lives in Dallas, is moving soon, I heard, made an exact replica of Duane's panel, which is the one that you'll see today when you go to look at it. Martha credits Marilyn, who died in 2004, with the recreation of Duane's panel. I got a picture here of the family, which the Puryears never would have thought to make on their own. The Puryears attended this grief group for over a year, and their relationship with Hollingsworth helped to resurrect and preserve this important piece of AIDS activist art. And of course, no one who looks at the block of the quilt will know this history by looking at it, because it is identical to Duane's. And Duane's panel, which was intended to be a one-of-a-kind kind of disruption of the familial mourning project of the quilt. Like, he understood what the quilt was, and he was like, no, I want to like screw with that and do it totally differently. And yet in the end, his parents made a quilt panel for him, right? And Doug really emphasizes this, right? That he got to make the panel in his way, as Doug said, and then we got to make it in what Doug called the traditional way, which is for the grieving, for the healing of the families. And so we got both benefits of the panel both ways, Doug said. Martha and Doug are also incredible, and I wish I could talk about them all day. They became very involved in the gay community. They are part of the gay community. They were active in PFLAG. They started an AIDS support group at their church, and they talk about feeling that their understanding of their son, not just as a gay person, but as a part of a gay community, is what kind of politically transformed them. And so that's why I also don't like to think about like memorial panels versus activist panels. And a lot of times people's critiques of the quilt can be, oh, it kind of desexualized the gay men and the epidemic, and it de-gayed the epidemic, and you have all these straight parents making these things, and it isn't as much of focus on queerness. And that can be a critique of the quilt. And yet also you have here this panel that I think really stands as a tribute to like straight people being radicalized by the gay community, by learning that a gay community existed and that they could contribute to that community. They kept telling me stories when I was visiting them about all their friends, and like everyone they knew was gay. I was like, do you guys know any straight people? Like, they had no references to straight people in the entire time that we spoke to each other. So like, they are very invested in the politics of the gay community. So the desire to be remembered and to have made the world a better place by bearing witness to your own humanity and the humanity of those around you is what animated Duane's art and activism. And even though I went a little over what I was going to do, I'm sorry. I do want to end with Duane's words, if that's okay. I want to give him the last word. He's a brief reflection here of his own goals and mission as an artist and as an activist.
I would like to think that somewhere, and I just have to believe this is true, I'd like to think that somewhere there's one boy or girl, young man, young woman, that's not going to get AIDS because of what I've said, because of what Duane Puryear has done. That would make it all worthwhile. If there was two, that would make it all worthwhile. That would be an even trade for me. That I could die knowing that there's two kids, two people that are gonna live on this planet and have full lives they wouldn't have if it hadn't been for me. That would make me happy. And I've got to believe that's true. I believe that's true.
All right, well, thank you so much. I'm happy to, applause for Duane. All right, we have a little time for questions, and then I want to make sure people have time to go see the exhibit if you haven't done it yet. So let me bring this back up so we can see Duane's parents and Duane. Here we go. Or comments, ideas, thoughts, feelings. Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. I'm not that familiar with the AIDS Memorial Quilt. Like, how big is it, and where is it?
Great. Those are good questions. Yeah. It currently has 50,000 plus panels on it, individual panels. And it is back in, so it was started in San Francisco. It moved to Atlanta. It was stored in Atlanta for a long time. And then in 2019 or 2020, it must have been 2020. No, 2019. It moved back to San Francisco and became part of the National AIDS Memorial. So it's no longer called the name's Project AIDS Memorial Quilt, because that organization no longer is the custodian of the quilt. But it's in just like store. Have you ever seen it, the facilities? Has anyone ever gone? It's kind of amazing. You can just go and they'll just like take one out and facilities in San Francisco. Yeah, but yeah, it's there. They're mailed out. They're shipped out for people. You can request, as was done here, to do displays. They want people to use it. There have been a lot of different conversations in the past about where it should be and who's in charge of the quilt. Like some people emphasize more, maybe it should be in museums and it's an art object. Other people are like, no, like it should be in schools and churches, and throw it any old place. That's the whole point. Like put it anywhere. So it's had its own history. The organization's history and the histories of display are also really interesting. But yeah. And they get about a new panel a week, Gert told me, 2020. So they still get panels infrequently, but they do, and they try to do intentional like quilt workshopping events to encourage people to continue to do panels. It's a great thing to do in any community still, is to organize. That's what Marilyn Hollingsworth did. She had a quilt panel, like a quilt workshop. People would just come and she'd have all the supplies and they would come and make their panels and then send it to the quilt. And I actually did that once when I worked at Tufts. We did a quilt making workshop. We brought a panel or block from a block. The whole thing is called a block, and then the panels are the smaller pieces that make up a block. So the blocks are 12 foot by 12 foot, right? You should know. 12 and a half by 12 and a half, because there's some cloth around it, additional cloth. But yeah, we had people come in and make individual panels. We did some events around it, and then they sent it off to the quilt. So everyone here can make one too if you haven't. Yeah.
Is there an online opportunity to go and sort it by city, for example?
Not sort it, but you can search for, they are trying to do better about getting it more searchable. What you can do is search in a city name, and if the name appears on the panel, it comes up. So that does suck, because yeah, it sucks. You can type in names. You can type in names, and they're pretty good. The search is pretty good for that. And city names if they appear on a panel. Other keywords, I think, but that one's not exhaustive. What I would love to be able to do is, because there's so many things that appear on multiple panels, like search like teddy bears, or there's a lot of something, elephants, a lot of weird clowns on the quilt. The quilt's really friggin' weird too. Like it's easy to be like, oh, this is so emotional and sentimental, and it is weird. There are so many weird things on the quilt. And like there's like a bowling ball on the quilt, like an actual bowling ball. They had there's condoms, there's like sexual artifacts too. That's what a lot of the critiques about, like, oh, the quilt sentimentalizes and infantilizes gay men because it's all these teddy bears. Like, you want to put some Crisco on there, they have that too. Like it's all there, like the full range. And so you can, but you can't search for those things, unfortunately. And they have talked too about like they've been critiqued for this too, but like the Names Project, when it was they were the custodians of the quilt, like kind of they would narrate it as, when we do an exhibit at a synagogue, we try to bring folks who were Jewish, or we did an exhibit a few years ago at the Asian Art Museum. We tried to get blocks that had Asian folks on it. If we go to a school, we try to find things that are kid appropriate. And so in that language, sometimes people then feel like, okay, you're trying to like sanitize the epidemic for certain people. But yeah.
Can you talk about approaching the family and building a relationship with them while you were doing this research?
Yeah. Yeah, I reached out to, I was on the board of the Dallas Way. I don't remember how I got Martha's number. I asked you first, Mike, I'm sure. And then you connected me to someone. I don't remember who it was. Yeah. Yeah. So someone knew someone, and they were like, yeah, they're alive. They live in Santa Fe. I didn't even think, I just heard this. The story kind of was like a bit of a like folklore, like, oh, his parents remade it. And actually a lot of people had different stories that were completely wrong about the quilt, about this panel, because that's what happens. People tell different kinds of stories. And so then I found out they lived in Santa Fe. I reached out, and they were like, yeah, do you want to come out and do an interview? And so my husband and I went out and spent a weekend with them, and in 2019. And yeah, it was awesome. We had a great time. And then I interviewed a bunch of other folks I didn't unfortunately get to meet in person. I interviewed everyone else virtually. And yeah, we've stayed in touch over the years. We Zoomed a lot during COVID, or not a lot, but we kept in touch during COVID. And then luckily I got to go back and see them a few weeks ago, which was really nice. Yeah, they're awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that Doug was an
Yeah, he's a psychiatrist.
Because I saw September 7th.
Oh, cool. Labor Day. Yeah. No, no, he didn't. He went and got tested somewhere in Dallas. Yeah, he was a psychiatrist, Doug. But yeah, interesting. Interesting. I didn't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of techie question. So is this now part of the same nonprofit group in San Francisco, the Grove, or who's in?
Yes. The National AIDS Memorial owns the quilt and also the Grove. So those are considered the National AIDS Memorial. These are components of the National AIDS Memorial. Yeah. And they've done some really cool, they have a really cool stuff on the website, kind of to the point to encourage people to create more panels, but like histories of, like there's like a history of, you know, Black. Another reason that it's challenging to do research on the quilt is they had, when you submitted things, when you submit a panel, you fill out some paperwork, but you know, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Not everyone submitted it. It's impartial. So like things like racial demographics of the quilt are hard to visualize because most people don't have images of people on the quilt, and there aren't always good accompanying documents. And so sometimes people feel like it's a very white-centered artifact, but that's also because you can't see people of color's representation on the quilt. And so they've done some really good things to, you know, through archival research, show who's featured on the quilt, in the quilt, and to encourage more participation in Black and Native communities to make quilt panels, which has been really cool. But yeah, the inability to search it effectively is one of the things that makes it hard to really fully like see it. It's enormous. You'll never see every panel on the quilt, which is right. It's astounding. I don't think it'll ever be displayed in whole again. It's just too big. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
So just a couple of resources. So yes, you can go to the National AIDS Memorial. .org. You can do the search of the panel there, but also the Library of Congress website.
Yeah, they have
loads, like to Nino's point about all the paperwork that got filled out. You could search all of that on the Library of Congress page. And I think also here at Irving, I don't think it's still open or not, but at the Irving Art Center, there is an art display there that an artist, she made a panel for her brother. And it's on display, I believe, still now at the Irving Art Center. So she's displaying it before it gets submitted to the national organization.
Yeah. Yeah, so letters that people, there were the projects to write accompanying letters. So those are also at the National Archives. There are also blocks called friendship squares which is a part of quilting tradition. A friendship square, the relationship between the quilting community and the quilt is also really interesting. I'm happy to talk about that later. They have a lot of thoughts about it. But people would, when they visit the quilts, they would leave big white blocks that were empty for people to sign, to leave their responses to the quilt. And so those are available. Cleve Jones tells really interesting stories about that too. Like people not often, but there were experiences of people writing like homophobic things on those. And he demanded that like they should be left as part of the archive of the quilt. Like this is part of the quilt's history. So this is what it looks like. I just want to show you. Like let's just say we put in Duane Puryear. So Duane actually has 2 panels on the quilt. The one that you've seen here. So it goes here, and then you could click on this, and it zooms in and shows you. This is his other panel. It was made by, I believe, by his friend Bob Gross. That's again a much more this is what I think of this as a much more traditional panel. Name, year you were born, year you died, Star of David, pink triangle. This was a quote that you might have seen Duane had tattooed on his chest. Some will survive. You can search by city. So let's just type in Dallas. Only if the name of the city appears. So we have 69 matches. Look at little red. This is the whole quilt. Isn't that amazing? These are all the panels. And then this shows you where, starting literally up here, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first panel made by Cleve Jones right here. And then they're more or less chronological, if I'm not mistaken. Am I mistaken? Oh, wait, hold on. Oh gosh, no, I'm not going to be able to use this. Okay, well, you get the point, and I can't zoom. But yeah, so then if it shows here, but you'll see there's also people like people's name, Bob Dallas. So it's not, you're not really searching for the city, you're searching for the word that appeared. But a lot of organizations made panels for people. And so you can search, and actually it's a great way to learn histories of local organizations and people who died. what the Names Project did not care for. I don't know if this has changed, but they don't want people to make, people do it anyway. They'll put it up there no matter what. But people, they don't want things that are just like dedicated to everyone. Yeah, they want a name on there, at least one name on there. But people do that and they include those. What was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, there's I think the state of Texas, I think you'll be either proud or not to know, is the most represented like state, like in terms of the image of the state. It's all over the quilt. So I would love to be able to search Texas to see how are the borders of the state being incorporated into different panels. That could be cool. But yeah, was there a hand over here? And part of it, and then I'll shut up. But part of what I argue in my article is that like we have so many histories of the quilt, and people are so mesmerized, as they should be, by how big it is, that when we talk about the quilt, we talk about how large it is. We talk about the national history of display, like when the history of those marches and those displays. Very seldom do we get in and just like say, okay, yes, the AIDS quilt is this thing, but like one individual person or 20 individual people made this panel, made that, and it's its own art object, and it has a history that is connected to certain things that can illuminate a lot about local AIDS histories that you don't see if you're only taking like a macro view of the quilt. So yeah. So now I want to make sure y'all have time to go look at the quilt. If you haven't seen it in person, please go look at it. Thank you, and thank you to everyone for watching.
All right, thank you, Nino. We'll turn you loose here. I just wanted to do a couple of quick plugs. We have programming. We're open until the end of September. We have programming all throughout, so please go to badgeofpride.org. You can follow along there, connect with us on social media. Please share your experience far and wide all over your social networks, because we need bodies in the building as much as possible. So we are thankfully, I think, still breaking attendance records for the museum here. Records sales in the gift shop, because we're kids, we have cool shit. Go check it out. A couple of other notes. The exhibit is 100% free. So that is a commitment that we made at the very beginning of this, is that we wanted no barriers to entry here. So if you are in a position to help us pay that forward, because the bill comes here, please do go to badgeofpride.org and make a donation. We have also translated the exhibit into gender inclusive Spanish, every single word. So we have tried to make this as accessible to more members of the community as possible. And so on that note, go check the thing out. You got plenty of time to go explore the exhibit. I'll hang around if you have any questions for me, but more importantly today, go check out, we have 2 blocks of the quilt on display. So,
and the local,
and some local ones,
yeah,
to Yes to Queer in Fort Worth and Tarrant County, locally held panels that were not submitted to the national organization. So, all right, thank you all so much for coming out.
Thank you all.